I was a nurse for over 22 years in the field of psychiatry.
The supervisor said, "Oh, you're on the ECT rotation next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do?"
The idea is that the shock will subdue the unwanted emotions. In fact, all it ended up with was brain damage.
I underwent electroshock therapy from the ages of 14 to 16.
And I can remember saying, "Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me?"
If this is a hospital, why are you locking the doors?
This is about making money at the expense of vulnerable people in our society.
It's one of the most barbaric treatments that the world has ever known.
I don't remember anything anymore. It's too late.
If I ask you what is ECT or electroconvulsive therapy, what do you say?
I have no idea.
I don't know. I have no clue.
I don't know.
I don't know the acronym, but I'm assuming you're talking about like electroshock therapy.
I think I've seen it in the movies.
It's a pretty bad reputation, and it's generally frowned upon nowadays.
Outdated. I don't think they really use that anymore.
It is considered an antiquated technique.
Barbaric.
Brutal.
Some say it was extremely traumatizing.
Did you know they're still doing electroshock?
I really did not know that this was actually still happening.
Oh, they're still doing it? Why?
I can't believe that it's still allowed.
I thought it was against the law.
De toutes les pratiques inhumaines de la psychiatrie, l'une des plus cruelles et des plus barbares est l'électroconvulsivothérapie.
People often ask, what is electroshock? And what it is electrocution. That's all it is. They don't call it electrocution, they call it electroconvulsive therapy because it has a magic three-letter acronym, ECT, and the one thing it isn't is therapy.
ECT involves applying electrodes to a patient's scalp and then passing an electrical current through the skull and the brain tissue in order to induce a seizure.
Les psychiatres font passer jusqu'à 460 volts d'électricité brute à travers le crâne pour délibérément créer une crise qui peut durer jusqu'à une demi-heure.
It is ultimately imparting large amounts of electricity, many times the voltage you would get even if you stuck your finger into a light socket.
En fait, l'ECT utilise assez de courant pour faire fonctionner 2 ascenseurs, conduire une grue de chargement ou alimenter 5 projecteurs de stade.
This is an electroconvulsive therapy machine, also called a shock machine. The purpose of this instrument is to run an electric current through the head of a patient. These are the 2 electrodes. The machine applies a voltage to these 2 electrodes, and that causes a current to flow through the patient's brain, and that constitutes the treatment. So if we set this dial to 100%, then this instrument is set to pass 3 billion electrons through the patient's head during one treatment.
Les appareils pour l'ECT génèrent près de 430 fois le courant qui sort d'un pistolet paralysant. Les machines elles-mêmes sont tout à fait basiques. Elles attirent l'électricité dans un condensateur, un dispositif de stockage d'énergie qui permet à la machine de conserver plus de 2 fois ce qu'une prise de courant peut dispenser. Quand il appuie sur le bouton, le psychiatre envoie cette énorme quantité d'électricité à haute tension directement à travers le crâne. Pourtant, le cerveau est un instrument extrêmement délicat qui est constitué d'environ une centaine de milliards de neurones. Il interprète et relaie un nombre incalculable de signaux qui sont nécessaires au contrôle du corps. plus de 5 billions de signaux par seconde. Le cerveau est alimenté par moins de 0,2 de volt d'électricité. C'est près de 8 fois moins que la pile d'une montre. Comparez cela aux 460 volts potentiels envoyés dans le cerveau lors d'une seule séance d'électrochoc. C'est 2300 fois la quantité d'électricité que le cerveau utilise pour fonctionner. C'est aussi puissant que d'être frappé au visage par un boxeur professionnel.
And the outcome of that is it destroys brain cells. And the more brain cells you destroy, in theory, the better it is for the person. The biggest mystery of all is why on earth people think that putting bolts of electricity through people's heads is a good idea.
Les psychiatres donnent des électrochocs aux patients pour créer ce qu'ils appellent une crise thérapeutique. Mais cela n'existe pas.
When we're in emergency departments and someone comes in with a seizure, that is a bona fide emergency. And we hop right to and try to stop the seizure immediately and its side effects and the things that it causes.
Une crise d'épilepsie est une soudaine décharge électrique dans le cerveau qui cause des altérations du comportement, des sensations ou de la conscience. Les crises peuvent être le résultat d'une maladie comme l'épilepsie ou être causées par des forces extérieures.
There are seizures that are fever-induced, or if it's alcohol withdrawn, or if it is caused by hallucinogens or by cocaine or methamphetamine. Those things, when the patient stops using them, they improve.
Mais avec l'ECT, les psychiatres produisent des crises sous leur forme la plus grave. On les appelle des crises de type grand mal. Et elles sont provoquées par une activité électrique anormale dans l'ensemble du cerveau.
A grand mal seizure is when you go unconscious and have a lot of spasmodic muscular contractions which can hurt you, and you can often lose control of your bladder and bowels.
They could stop breathing, they could bite their tongue, arch their back to such an extent as to cause a fracture of the spine. It's just a complete disorganization of neurologic function where a person has no control over their body.
The more seizures a person has, the more potential there is for cognitive decline, different neurologic dysfunctions, and more seizures.
Having recurrent seizures potentially reduces the lifespan of that individual. It has an impact on mortality.
Chaque année, 45 000 Américains meurent de crises d'épilepsie, autant de tués que dans les accidents de la route.
You know, mainstream physicians go to great lengths to prevent seizures. Epilepsy, seizure disorder, is a medical problem that we give medication for in order to prevent any seizures, not just some seizures. The idea is to prevent seizures, to prevent brain damage, because it's recognized that seizure activity promotes brain damage.
Pourtant, c'est ce que les médecins pratiquant des ECT revendiquent comme étant thérapeutique. Et ils provoquent donc délibérément des crises de type grand mal.
I became part of the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which is an international watchdog investigating psychiatric abuses, because I've had shock treatment. I know the damage that it caused. I know what damage it did, not just to me, but to my family who had to get me through that. You know, when I was very young, I felt depressed, but what I didn't know is that I actually had an underactive thyroid. I was sent to a psychiatrist by my GP, and he said, well, you need shock treatment. The shock is like a grenade going off in the body. The violence of this, it's like every nerve and every cell is being electrified and with such force. And you come out of it and you know that body is never going to be the same again. When I woke up, I was so disjointed. I didn't know where I was. I was in an incredible amount of pain. And I looked at this person standing next to my bed, and I didn't know who it was. I said, well, who are you? And she said, I'm your mother. Electroshock is torture being passed off as therapy. It is a betrayal.
Comment les psychiatres s'en tirent avec ce traitement barbare? Leur histoire en est truffée. Dans les années 1920, le psychiatre Manfred Sackel a déclaré qu'il pourrait avec succès traiter les malades mentaux en tuant les mauvaises cellules du cerveau. En réalité, il provoquait des crises et des lésions cérébrales en utilisant de l'insuline, ce qui a tué 5% des patients traités et a transformé certains autres en handicapés mentaux. Le neuropsychiatre hongrois Ladislav Meduna, lui, prétendait qu'il pouvait éliminer la maladie mentale en provoquant des crises et des lésions cérébrales avec une substance appelée le métrazole. Mais cela a aussi échoué.
Since its inception, psychiatry has really had 4 modalities of treatment that they recircle over and over again. Cut it, burn it, drug it, shock it to the human mind. So when one of their treatments fails, they use it to promote the next one.
Après les dommages causés par le métrazole, les psychiatres ont sauté sur la lobotomie préfrontale comme leur dernier remède miracle. En utilisant un pic à glace pour détruire le cerveau de leurs patients, les psychiatres ont mis des dizaines de milliers de patients dans un état végétatif jusqu'à ce qu'une opposition féroce oblige les psychiatres à abandonner cette procédure monstrueuse. Pendant ce temps, ils s'étaient déjà tournés vers une nouvelle percée, l'électricité.
Hugo Streletti wrote in his own documents that he was inspired to develop electroshock by his observation of pigs being led to slaughter. And he saw that the effect of shock on these pigs was to make them more docile and controllable, and it made them not even fight for their own survival.
Pendant les 2 années qui suivirent, Streletti fit des expériences avec des chocs électriques sur différents animaux.
Streletti progressed to taking homeless people off the street and subjecting them to electric shock.
Selon Streletti lui-même, sa première victime humaine, un sans-abri, l'a supplié de ne pas recevoir d'électrochocs à nouveau. Le collègue de Streletti, le psychiatre allemand Lothar Kalinowski, a vu les horreurs de cette première procédure, comme se le rappelle sa femme.
He came home for lunch, as white as a sheet, and said, "Today I saw something terrible." And he described the first electrochoc treatment, and he ended with, "I never want to see this again."
En dépit du dommage évident que les psychiatres causaient avec les électrochocs, ils ont rapidement répandu cette procédure lucrative dans toute l'Europe et aux États-Unis. Dans les années 40, les électrochocs étaient utilisés à grande échelle et dans leur forme la plus grossière.
The original idea was that you would invoke a convulsion. And of course, by definition, if you're having a convulsion, your body is jerking. The problem was that people's bodies were jerking so much, they were breaking their shoulders, they were breaking their necks, bones were being broken.
Mais cela n'a pas empêché les psychiatres de promouvoir cette procédure brutale devant le public.
Many patients have been returned to their homes and jobs who might still be here if it were not for this helpful form of treatment.
ECT has been around since I was a medical student, and I graduated from medical school 60 years ago this year. I considered it, as a medical student, having observed a few of them, I guess the kindest thing I could say is barbarian. I thought it was truly one of the most obnoxious things I'd ever seen done to a human being. A huge percentage of these people have brain damage.
Dans les années 50, les lésions cérébrales provoquées par les ECT étaient devenues trop importantes pour qu'on puisse les ignorer. Donc les psychiatres déformèrent la vérité pour en tirer avantage.
Experts like Walter Freeman would say that the reason that ECT works is because it causes brain damage.
Maybe it will be shown that a mentally ill patient can think more clearly and more constructively with less brain in actual operation.
Et ainsi était le but énoncé. Un cerveau moins actif.
In the 1940s and the 1950s, it was very open in the medical literature that the way electroshock, quote, worked was by brain damage. And yet they went on to say that this was somehow going to end up being beneficial for the patient, when all it really ended up with was brain damage.
Cette approche marketing a brusquement changé en 1975, quand le film Vol au-dessus d'un nid de coucou a dénoncé la brutalité du traitement.
The movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest forever changed the course of the public's perception of electroshock therapy because it was so accurately portrayed in the film. It was so obviously torture.
Maintenant que les électrochocs étaient connus du grand public, les médias ont commencé à documenter le carnage.
Just like it's true that you can chemically control someone, yes, you can electrically shock someone out of their so-called crazy mind, but you don't shock them back into their right mind. You shock them into a shocked mind.
Même le grand-père des électrochocs aux États-Unis a reconnu les dommages qu'ils causent.
The principal complications of ECT are death, brain damage, memory impairment, and spontaneous seizures.
Gonna do another one, Paul? I think so. These are short seizures.
Face à l'indignation du public, les psychiatres ont proposé un nouveau remède miracle. Les psychotropes. Mais ils se sont aussi avérés inefficaces et dangereux et constituaient une lobotomie chimique. Les psychiatres avaient une réponse, recycler et reconditionner les électrochocs.
Electroshock was so abhorrent to the American public that psychiatry came up with a PR campaign to change its name to electroconvulsive therapy. But it is not therapy. It has never been therapy.
Pour couvrir les dommages, les médecins administrants des ECT ont ajouté une anesthésie et des agents paralysants pour empêcher les convulsions de leurs patients. Ils ont fait la promotion de l'ECT comme étant moderne et continuent de le faire encore aujourd'hui.
Well, electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT today, is nothing like what you've seen in the movies. It's a modern medical procedure.
Modern ECT is a lot better than old-fashioned ECT.
It doesn't look at all barbaric now.
Mais derrière les laïus de vente, les électrochocs sont toujours aussi violents. Et le résultat reste le même, une crise d'épilepsie de type grand mal et des lésions cérébrales. La seule chose qui a changé, c'est le marketing.
I was a psychiatric nurse for 22 years, and I worked at a facility that did ECTs on adults. I became a whistleblower because I saw things that were being done to patients that were wrong, were unlawful, unethical. We used to tell our patients who would go in for ECT, things are not the same as they used to be back in the 1950s. And at the consultation, we would give out these videos called Chaque. And our overall pitch to patients was, we don't know how it works. We just know that it does. We would compare it to rebooting a computer. The patients were led to believe this was somehow a miracle. And it wasn't a miracle. I didn't see any miracles, and I was in the business.
Un milieu au sein duquel les machines à ECT ont toujours créé des lésions cérébrales.
Here we have two electroconvulsive therapy machines. This one is from the 1940s, and this one is a much more modern machine from the 2000s. They both have the same potential to do damage to the brain by running large amounts of electricity through the brain cells with the risk that cells will be damaged or killed.
Pourtant, les vidéos faisant la promotion des électrochocs présentent des psychiatres qui assurent exactement le contraire.
ECT is the gold standard treatment for that type of depression. It's a small amount of current. It's nothing like what's in the outlet at home, okay?
C'est un mensonge typique et largement promu. Contrairement aux machines à ECT, les prises murales ne sont pas conçues pour électrocuter les gens. Aux États-Unis, elles disposent de fusibles de sécurité qui coupent le courant à 6 millièmes d'un ampère, une unité qui représente la force d'un courant électrique. Les machines à ECT modernes, cependant, génèrent de 800 à 900 millièmes d'un ampère, soit jusqu'à 150 fois la limite légale pour protéger de l'électrocution. Et c'est ce qui passe à travers la tête des patients qui reçoivent une ECT.
I was only 24 years old, and I didn't have anything except what you call the baby blues. My hormones were completely messed up after having a child. My husband was told that the best way to handle this was take me to a psychiatrist. And the next thing I know, they have me in a hospital, and they shocked me. And you would just wake up not knowing where you are or how you got there. And they would send me back, and they would just continue to do this over and over and over and over again. You just got shocked whether you wanted to be shocked or not. They just have to keep hitting your head with that hammer. They gave me 28 shock treatments. They took my soul, my mind, my intellect, my emotions. They put electricity to it. They ran it through my head and literally raped my soul.
L'ECT moderne et reconditionné présente plus de dangers que si ce n'était que de l'électricité.
The drug they use as a relaxant in the US before you receive electroshock is also the drug they use for lethal injections.
Ce produit est appelé la succinylcholine. Elle paralyse tous les muscles du corps, sauf le cœur. À cause de son efficacité pour créer un arrêt respiratoire, c'est un produit qui est régulièrement utilisé lors de l'exécution des condamnés à mort. Les psychiatres l'utilisent pour l'électroconvulsivothérapie.
The same drug that's used to kill the person in the execution by paralyzing his breathing also paralyzes his breathing during the shock treatment, which is why the anesthesiologist actually has to ventilate the patient during the procedure. Same drug, same effect.
Modern electroshock is being given under sterile conditions in a regular operating room, looking very much like a regular medical operation, and it's all much more acceptable to anybody who would observe it. In fact, the literature shows that electroshock given under general anesthesia may even be more brain damaging than electroshock as it was given before.
La raison? L'anesthésie et les produits paralysants font monter le seuil épileptogène, exigeant une augmentation de l'intensité du courant électrique pour produire une crise d'épilepsie. Et plus un patient reçoit des traitements par électrochoc, plus leur seuil devient élevé. Donc, les psychiatres augmentent le niveau d'électricité à chaque fois. Cela provoque des lésions cérébrales, que le patient soit sous sédatif ou non.
When you give a shock treatment and you give the anesthesia, it does nothing to protect their brain. So you can only protect their body while you're destroying their mind.
It's like this. If you are awake and get hit with a baseball bat, it's obvious that we would feel a lot of pain. But if you're unconscious and get hit with a baseball bat, your body goes through that same trauma. So why are we acting as if in our society that the body doesn't go through trauma just because somebody's conscious or not conscious?
Autrefois, les médecins administrant des électrochocs utilisaient 80 volts d'électricité, ce qui est infime comparé à ce qui est dispensé par les machines à ECT d'aujourd'hui. En fait, un fabricant de machines à électrochocs recommande que les psychiatres augmentent la quantité d'électricité jusqu'à 6 fois ce qui est nécessaire pour produire une crise d'épilepsie.
We have here a Spectrum 4000 ECT machine, which is a modern device. It's connected to 2 resistors here, which is typical of the resistance that a patient's head would present to an ECT machine. I'm going to hit the treat button, and we'll be able to see if there's any temperature rise using the heat gun. I'll press the treat button. 112, 118, 120. So, We see that the current that the ECT machine forced through these resistors caused them to heat up from approximately 75 degrees to 120 degrees. The cells can get too hot, they can be damaged, or even die.
If you look at the MRI of their brain, they have areas that have disappeared. They're wasting away, just like somebody with Alzheimer's.
Cela revient à être frappé par 450 fois le courant d'un aiguillon électrique. Mais pour beaucoup de gens, le mal est bien plus que physique.
Every time I look in the mirror, I try to wonder who I am. You know, just try to kind of put the pieces together of who I used to be. I started an antidepressant, and then it was just multiple cocktails of drugs, of antipsychotics, antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, sleeping medication, stimulants. And I just deemed treatment resistant. And then at 21, I was given electroshock. I went through a neurocognitive testing 6 months after, and I lost approximately about 50 points of IQ. My IQ is measured at 78, which I think that 75 is rendered mentally retarded. It's a constant identity crisis that I deal with. I do consider shock treatment torture because it damaged me physically and mentally in every way, and it's just continue. It's like every day I'm reliving the shock because I don't know who I am. They say that it's safe and effective, but you know, I think I'm living proof that it's not.
Les psychiatres ne sont pas en mesure de prétendre que les électrochocs sont sûrs ou efficaces parce que leur connaissance de ces bases fait cruellement défaut.
Electrical engineers understand how electricity works, and biomedical engineers understand the effects that electric currents can have on human tissue. Psychiatrists, however, typically don't receive the kind of training to make them understand electricity, what it is, what it does, what it can do to the human body. So we have in this case an operator who is merely trained to set the knobs and push the buttons without understanding the ramifications of what he's doing.
Un médecin qui administrait des électrochocs a été questionné devant un tribunal sur sa formation en électricité et cela prouve bien les choses.
What is an amp?
What is an amp? You know, it's been a long time since high school physics, and I couldn't give you a scientific definition of what an amperage is.
Do you have a definition of a volt?
A volt. A volt might be the power at which an amperage is pushed through an electrical wire.
You're not quite sure what these terms mean, are you?
I'm not quite sure.
One of the settings that you put on your dials on your machine is hertz, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you know what the term hertz actually means?
I don't.
Do you tell your patients about your level of understanding of the resistance of the brain to the electricity you're sending through it?
No.
Do you think they might want to know before they lay their head down on the operating table to have you give them shock treatment?
No one's ever asked.
Avant son témoignage, le docteur Joseph Johnson avait donné plus de 1800 traitements par électrochoc. Mais le docteur Johnson n'est pas le seul à être horriblement ignorant des principes de base et des termes du domaine de l'électricité. Les programmes dans les écoles de formation psychiatrique ne contiennent que très peu d'informations sur le sujet. Et les psychiatres admettront qu'ils ne connaissent rien au sujet du mode d'action de leur soi-disant traitement.
Electroshock is as much art as science because how it works is still a mystery.
Do you know how it works, Jonathan?
I don't think anybody really knows how it works.
There's no specific answer to that question.
People don't understand why this works or how it works.
How does it work? Well, as a field, we are focusing on researching that question.
We don't really know, is what you're saying.
We don't have the complete answers. However, it's not a complete cure.
Comment les psychiatres s'en tirent avec ça, c'est un autre mystère.
A cardiologist, orthopedic surgeons, other physicians in other specialties really just couldn't get away with using tools of their trades with knowing so little about it as shock doctors do about what they're doing.
Et pourtant, les psychiatres s'en tirent ainsi chaque fois qu'ils effectuent cette procédure.
Psychiatrists will tell you that they don't know exactly how ECT works, but what they do know is that it causes brain damage, organ failure, it can kill someone, it can cause seizures. They do know that much, but they can't tell us how it actually works.
Le psychiatre Richard Abrams, copropriétaire de l'entreprise qui fabrique les machines à ECT Somatics, a admis sous serment sa propre ignorance.
Do you have any understanding as to the mechanics of how ECT works?
I do not.
All right. Would you agree that that's the general state of the industry still today? That the practitioners of ECT don't have an understanding of how it works?
That's correct.
Ce même Richard Abrams a écrit le manuel standard sur l'ECT. Ce même psychiatre, qui admet ne rien savoir sur la façon dont les ECT fonctionnent, a écrit un manuel qui semble être scientifique et faire autorité, tout en fabriquant des machines à ECT et en les vendant partout dans le monde. Pendant ce temps, ceux qui pratiquent les ECT utilisent ces machines à ECT et infligent à leurs victimes plus de volts qu'une presse typographique industrielle.
They see that as their job. Give the patient the drugs and they push the red button and zapping. But they don't study the underlying science because there isn't any.
My personal experience as a psychiatry resident was I was doing a rotation. All of a sudden my supervisor says, "Oh, you're on the rotation for ECT next week." And I said, "Oh, well, what do I do?" I've had no training, no instruction whatsoever. I arrive at the room, I walk in, there's the anesthetist, there's the nurse, there's the equipment, the patient's wheeled in, and now I have to set the settings on the machine. So I look at the log, and I say, oh, well, the last time this person had a treatment, the settings were this and this. So I adjust the dials, person gets treated. Next patient who comes in, it's their first course of ECT, the very first treatment. So there's nothing in the logbook. So then I go, I guess I'll just do halfway in between the last two patients. Set the dials, off we go. That's literally the experience I had. No supervision, no follow-up, nothing.
Même des médecins administrant des ECT avec une longue expérience ne savent pas la quantité d'électricité qui produira une crise d'épilepsie chez un nouveau patient. On procède par tâtonnement. Prenez Charles Kellner, un psychiatre connu qui administre des ECT, qui a présenté sa technique sur les chaînes de télévision nationales.
Preparing the sites for the electrodes for the delivery of the stimulus.
Okay, Mark.
Okay, treated. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Still didn't get it?
No.
Got it. Okay. Now she's having a seizure. Yeah.
Half an hour after her seizure, Terry is in recovery.
Okay. Your treatment went really well. I want you to know that, okay?
The very next day, Terry is back.
Do you recognize me? No, I'm Dr. Kellner.
Infliger à un patient 3 séances d'ECT les unes après les autres qui endommagent le cerveau, ce n'est pas qu'une agression. Les électrochocs handicapent tous ceux qui en reçoivent. L'un des plus grands partisans des électrochocs, le psychologue Harold Sackheim, a déclaré sous serment.
Altered cognition is the most common side effect of ECT. That memory loss occurs, it's universal, and in some individuals it can be profound.
Le trouble cognitif n'est pas un sujet à prendre à la légère. C'est une dégradation des plus hauts centres de fonctionnement du cerveau, contrôlant la conscience des émotions, la compréhension de soi, le jugement et la mémoire. Et une perte de mémoire est la première chose que les victimes d'ECT remarquent.
It wasn't until I was at Shoal Creek that I saw a psychiatrist. And little did I know, after I signed myself in freely, that I couldn't leave for 72 hours. I wouldn't leave my room. I couldn't be around other people. I was terrified, and every time I went for another treatment of ECT, I got more and more paranoid. My head was exploding for days. I couldn't do anything but fall on the bed and sleep for 16 hours or something. I'd have to write everything down and then remember where I wrote it. My family would tell me, look at your book. Look at your book. I had to carry this book around with me all the time. My first service dog I got because if I left the apartment to go check the mail, I would get lost. I couldn't remember the number of the apartment. I'd just wander around. When I applied for disability, I had to go to the office and take some kind of test. I couldn't tell them my name. I couldn't tell them where I lived. I couldn't tell them how to get to my house. I couldn't tell them the president. I couldn't tell them anything. And my older sister told me that they asked her, is she like this all the time? And she said, pretty much.
I spent 30 years working in the psychiatric system, principally as a clinical psychologist. And during that time, I saw numerous patients who'd received electroshock. I spoke with numerous psychiatrists who delivered electroshock. And it was really after that I became kind of intrigued as to what was going on and why were these people delivering it. And more to the point, why did so many of my patients have long-term memory problems? There's a thing called anterograde amnesia, which is you lose your memory for everything after the shock, so you don't create new memories. And then there's retrograde amnesia, which is you lose memories for things immediately before the shock.
There's only been a few studies done in the last 33 years on permanent amnesia over the long term, 6 months or greater. And what they found, when they look for it, they find it. But they tend just not to look for it.
They knew about permanent memory loss a long time ago, and they actually instructed the field to say that it wasn't permanent, that it wasn't long-term, to use words such as transient, words such as spotty, words such as temporary, to minimize these adverse events.
Mais en dehors de leur clinique, les psychiatres avouent que la perte de mémoire est une caractéristique importante de l'ECT.
Clearly there are risks with ECT. That's been well established for a long time. Some people have regretted doing it because of memory impairment.
Memory loss occurs when patients get electroconvulsive therapy.
The amnesia problem with memory.
They have some memory problems that persist more than we'd like.
While someone's going through ECT, they have pretty profound memory loss.
Sometimes, they can impact the patient pretty severely.
It's like a little volcano inside the brain.
You get more bang for your buck with ECT. If you pardon the pun, you know.
Mais les psychiatres qui administrent des électrochocs font rarement des confessions aussi franches à leurs patients.
The industry has variously represented that ECT's benefits exceed its disadvantages. They don't deny that there are disadvantages to ECT, they minimize them. It's a sales pitch.
Et c'est élaboré par les entreprises de marketing qui donnent des points à mettre en avant à des psychiatres formés pour parler dans les médias.
ECT is the fastest and most effective treatment that we have.
It's the most effective treatment that we have today for severe depression.
The single most effective treatment we have for depression.
Is the most effective
really
treatment.
Effective for depression. It's
ECT
more effective
is
than
more
medication.
effective than antidepressant
More
therapies.
effective than many of the psychotropic
ECT
medications.
remains number one.
More than medication, more than therapy, more than ketamine.
One of the most effective treatments for anything in medicine.
Mais les phrases qu'ils répètent sont de la publicité, pas de la science.
Shock psychiatrists blame all kinds of adverse effects of ECT on the patient or their underlying mental condition. For example, memory loss or inability to make executive decisions are blamed on the person's underlying depression when it's actually an effect of the ECT.
En plus d'infliger des blessures à la tête, l'ECT peut causer des lésions dans le reste du corps.
That's why
When you get ECT, there's a crash cart there in case the heart goes into an abnormal rhythm. And if that happens, the doctors have that there in order to bring the person back to life.
En dépit des nombreux cas où les séquelles provoquées par l'ECT ont été prouvées, les psychiatres écartent ces rapports en les disant non fondés. Ils ignorent aussi leurs propres études démontrant que l'ECT ne vaut rien.
Sham ECT is basically placebo control, where the person's wheeled into the room, they're put to sleep, electrodes are put on their head, buttons pushed, but there's no electricity. And so the patient doesn't know if they got real or sham. There's only 12 or 13 of those kind of studies ever. And when you pool them together, there is absolutely no evidence anywhere that people who've had ECT are better off 1 month later.
Mais ceux qui reçoivent une vraie ECT sont fréquemment pris dans l'engrenage de l'industrie des électrochocs.
Just like with psychiatric drugs and in the psych hospital, they keep coming back. We used to call them frequent flyers. They would be readmitted, readmitted, readmitted. We see the same patients coming in and out, in and out.
Mais des psychiatres comme Sarah Lisenby reprochent aux patients sa rechute plutôt que de reprocher au traitement de ne pas avoir fonctionné.
Without a maintenance treatment, you can have rapid relapse, but with maintenance treatment, you can have sustained relapse prevention.
Can I ask you, Dr. Lisenby, what you think the minimum length of time is that is required to demonstrate an effect of the device?
Well, I guess I'm saying that, I guess I'm trying to answer by analogy. ECT is an effective intervention without any form of relapse prevention. Patients will relapse very quickly.
En fait, voilà ce que les psychiatres appellent une rechute. Le traumatisme cérébral causé par l'ECT est considérable. C'est comme si un bloc de béton de 18 kg tombait de 2 mètres de haut pour s'écraser sur votre tête. Pour guérir ces dégâts catastrophiques, le cerveau libère des éléments chimiques, ce qui crée une sensation d'euphorie. Mais cela se dissipe rapidement et les problèmes de la personne reviennent, souvent encore plus violemment. Et quand cela se produit, les psychiatres prescrivent plus d'ECT. Ils appellent cela de l'ECT de maintenance, de suivi ou d'entretien.
The nature of depression is that it is usually a relapsing illness.
Regular recurring ECT treatments may be needed.
Many people often go on to get what's called maintenance.
Ongoing maintenance therapy is provided.
And then you need another 10 ECT.
This is going to be a repeated pattern of these people are going to be on courses of treatment that will last for the rest of their lives.
And, you know, the average today is about 35 treatments of shock every year. And of course, it doesn't work, it just makes them worse and it damages.
Les psychiatres et fabricants de machines à ECT, Richard Abrams et Konrad Schwartz, ont admis ce manque de résultats dans une lettre adressée à la FDA. Il n'est pas surprenant que les évaluations effectuées des semaines ou des mois après la fin de la cure d'ECT ne montrent généralement pas les avantages substantiels de l'ECT. L'ECT ne se limite pas seulement à créer des lésions cérébrales et à détruire les fonctions du corps. Cela peut aussi être fatal.
It can make people suicidal, either just contemplating suicide or actually going out and taking their lives.
The man who left an indelible impression on English literature is dead. Ernest Hemingway died of a self-inflicted wound at his Ketchum, Idaho home.
L'écrivain et lauréat du prix Nobel Ernest Hemingway s'est suicidé peu de temps après avoir été soumis à une série d'électrochocs. Avant sa mort, il a déclaré « Pourquoi me détruire la tête ? M'effacer la mémoire, qui est mon capital, et m'obliger à fermer boutique ?» Le traitement était brillant, mais on a perdu le patient.
And we know that by doing ECT, the suicide rate, you're 13 times more likely to commit suicide if you do the ECT than if you had never done it.
I was bullied at school, being abused at home. So then, the doctor tells me, well, we want to try a new treatment with you. She's like, we call it ECT. I was 17 years old when I received ECT for the first time. Here I am, I'm a scrawny 110-pound kid, and you got these guys that are like ex-military UFC-looking fighters just grabbing me, throwing me in a room, and stabbing me with an injection, putting leather restraints on my arms. Then all I remember is waking up in my room. My head felt like it was on fire. It was like the worst headache I've ever had. And then I started panicking because I didn't know who I was. I don't remember my name. I don't remember anything. I remember what happened the day before. It was, I didn't remember anything at all. When I came back, I wasn't used to my home, my neighborhood, nothing. And the next 4 years, I blinked. And it got to the point where I got fed up with it. So I took like half of my Prozac and I just, put it in my mouth, put myself like a self-induced coma. I remember I was just in my bed all day, cutting myself, trying drowning myself, hanging myself, thinking of ways I could end my life, putting a plastic bag around my head, tying it, and going under my blankets, just waiting to die already. Even to this day, I'm still suicidal. I mean, if you don't care about your memories or your life or anything like that, oh yeah, go ahead, do it. If you love pain, you love headaches and all that, yeah, go do it. If you want to remember your life, you want to remember your friends and all the good times, yeah, don't do it.
One of the dangers of ECT is death. That's known. It's actually reported in MedWatch reports in the FDA. You had a death that occurred to a patient just hours after they received ECT. So, does ECT cause death? Yes, it does.
Researchers at Brown University looked at the effect of ECT in the elderly. They looked at depressed elderly patients who were given ECT and compared them to depressed elderly patients who got usual medical treatment. And they found that the death rate after just 1 year among the ECT recipients was 27%, compared to an over 96% survival rate among the people who were treated without electric shock.
En d'autres termes, le taux de décès des personnes âgées qui avaient reçu une ECT était 6 fois plus élevé que chez ceux qui n'en avaient pas reçu.
So one of the demonstrations I like to do with ECT is show the difference in the amount of electricity based on the age. So if a person is 20 years old and you do the electric shock, this is how long it is. If a person is 70 years old, this is the length. So the longer the electric shock is based on how old you are.
So 2/3 of the recipients of electroshock are women. Something like 3/4 of them are over the age of 60. I think the oldest person to receive electroshock was 104.
La mort prématurée n'est pas limitée aux personnes âgées. Une étude importante effectuée sur plus de 3000 patients en ECT a montré une augmentation du taux de décès chez les victimes d'ECT de tout âge, quelle qu'en soit la cause. Même l'Association américaine de psychiatrie rapporte que l'ECT tue. Cependant, ils prétendent que ce n'est le cas qu'avec un patient sur 10 000. Une supposition faite par Richard Abrams, le psychiatre qui fabrique et qui vend les machines à ECT. Les chiffres réels, l'État du Texas rapporte qu'une personne sur 350 meurt dans les 2 semaines après avoir reçu des ECT. C'est 50 fois plus élevé que le taux de meurtre aux États-Unis et 30 fois plus élevé que ce que proclame l'APA. Même quand les patients refusent une ECT, dans la majeure partie du monde, ils ne sont toujours pas en sécurité.
So if a person determines, I don't want ECT, the psychiatrist can actually go to a judge who can determine that he's not competent to make his own medical decisions and override his own decision about what he wants done to himself and his body, and actually deliver him electroconvulsive therapy against his will.
I was assigned to a psychiatrist who was very aggressive in his manner in trying to get me to agree to do ECT. You know, I was skeptical and I said, no, I don't want to do it. The psychiatrist pretty much threatened me. He said that if I don't agree to it, then they can get a court order. My family actually sided with me. They said that they shouldn't do this to me against my wishes. Basically, all the doctors said that I needed to have ECT and that I was not in my right mind to refuse. The probate court judge agreed with them and he issued the court order, and that was how they started the forced ECT on me. I was pretty much tortured. I was being forced to have this treatment. I didn't like it, I didn't want it, and when I was honest with the doctors about how it affected me and I told them, they just interpreted that as part of my depression. I realized that the only way to stop this was to start lying, so that's what I did. What was done to me was really, frankly, evil. It's a barbaric treatment, and that it shouldn't be done to people against their will like it was done to me.
With psychiatry, like most of their treatments, these are frequently given without consent of the patient because it is the only quote-unquote medical field where their authority supersedes your rights, an individual's rights to consent to treatment.
If it breaks their skin like an injection, or if it's a drug that you feed into them one way or another, or if it's electroshock therapy, that is violating a person's sovereignty over his own body. A person has a right to their own body. They have a right not to be violated.
Le rapporteur spécial des Nations Unies sur la torture condamne le CT forcé de façon très catégorique.
Against your will, electroshock therapy is, in my opinion, absolutely prohibited. I have seen so many persons who have been subjected to electroshocks in order to extract a confession or information, etc. And it's one of the worst feelings of pain you can imagine if this electric current is really runs through your body. So it's the contractions. It might even lead to death. In my opinion, they are torture.
À l'origine, le CT était parfois utilisé pour faire exactement cela, torturer. Durant la période nazie, les psychiatres allemands ont administré des séances mortelles de CT à des malades mentaux qu'ils jugeaient inaptes à vivre. Dans les années 50, durant la guerre d'Algérie, les psychiatres ont donné des électrochocs aux prisonniers avant de les interroger. La CIA a formé les services de sécurité marocains à l'utilisation d'électrochocs pour des interrogatoires. Les psychiatres de l'Union soviétique ont utilisé des électrochocs pour punir les dissidents politiques qui refusaient de rentrer dans le rang.
In South Africa, ECT was used as a torturous method of treatment for a group that mental health considered to be animals, because they actually had the idea that if you were black, you couldn't feel pain.
One of the original ECT devices, which was actually manufactured in the UK, called the Page Russell, was used for torture in Arabic countries and was used on political prisoners. So how do you call something help or treatment when it's been used for torture?
Les psychiatres ont également utilisé les électrochocs dans le domaine du contrôle mental.
In a moment, we will examine the closest experimentation to brainwashing that we have uncovered.
Le psychiatre tristement célèbre Ewen Cameron a effectué des expériences avec des drogues et des électrochocs à très haute tension afin de plonger les gens dans un sommeil profond, comateux, et de les réduire à un état infantile.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world.
Un fervent défenseur des traitements de Cameron a été le psychiatre australien Harry Bailey.
Dr. Harry Bailey studied a treatment called deep sleep therapy, and it involved knocking a person unconscious with a cocktail of psychiatric drugs, usually barbiturates and sedative hypnotics. And while they were in that comatose state, they were given electroshock treatment, sometimes twice daily. The patients were dying. There were 48 deaths. Over 1,100 patients were subjected to this. They all had brain damage. They all had personality changes. They had blood clots. They were seriously damaged by this so-called treatment.
Tonight, why was deep sleep therapy ever allowed to happen at Chelmsford?
The analogy with the appalling medical experimentation by Nazi doctors is difficult to avoid.
Certainly the information that we gave to the Attorney General's Department showed clearly that very often patients were given electric shock treatment without their consent.
The question has remained ever since then, why hasn't the matter been satisfactorily resolved?
CCHR, along with the Chelmsford Victims Action Group, got local media. There were demonstrations on the steps of Parliament demanding a government inquiry into deep sleep treatment. And we worked with legislators and we agitated for reforms, and it actually produced some of the biggest reforms Australia's ever seen.
Good evening. There will be a royal commission into the controversial Chelmsford Hospital deep sleep treatment.
Let me tell you that this royal commission will get to the bottom of all of the abuses that have gone on in the system.
And it was through our investigations, through the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, working with patients and their families who had undergone this deep sleep treatment, we ended up having deep sleep treatment banned.
Aujourd'hui, les psychiatres administrant des électrochocs ciblent un nouveau secteur de la population. On dit maintenant aux femmes enceintes que l'ECT est sans danger pour elles et leur futur bébé.
When a woman is pregnant, she shouldn't drink coffee, she's not supposed to smoke. There's a whole list of things that are bad for the baby when it's in the prenatal stage. However, pregnant women are getting electric shock, causing miscarriages.
It boggles the mind that something like this can be given to a woman who is growing a baby in her body, that of course the electricity is going to affect her and her unborn child.
Les enfants représentent une cible de plus en plus grande pour les psychiatres et leur ECT.
It's a horrible idea to give electroconvulsive therapy to children. We don't know what the long-term effects are, but it only makes sense that repeated seizures like that could cause cognitive difficulties, learning difficulties, and damage to the nervous system as it's developing.
If you're going to destroy an adult brain, just think what you could do with a child brain. You could do much more damage. Take away his whole future.
Il y a une très bonne raison scientifique pour laquelle les enfants ne devraient jamais subir d'électrochocs.
In a fully matured brain, there are between 60 and 90 billion nerve cells. And when they die, they are not replaced. But in children, the brain is still developing. So if a cell is killed in an adult, that is one less brain cell the person has to operate with. But if a cell is killed in a child, then not only does he lose that cell, but he loses all the other cells that cell would have created during the development of the brain. So ECT is more dangerous to children even than it is to adults.
Right now in the United States, through Freedom of Information Act, CCHR has uncovered the fact that 16 states are currently electroshocking children and adolescents, and 5 of those states are electroshocking children aged 0 to 5.
Psychiatrists give electroshock to children all over the world. In Australia, children as young as 4 receive electroshock. In Turkey, 9-year-old children receive it explicitly as a punishment.
I'm an ex-law enforcement officer. Much milder things can land people in jail than to send a child through that type of trauma. We have a society where a parent can't even spank a child, but psychiatrists can put 400 volts through the brain of a child.
Under the definition, it's abuse in no other way. You are inflicting harm to a child under the guise of treatment.
L'Organisation mondiale de la santé publia une injonction formelle. Rien n'indique qu'il faille utiliser l'ECT sur des mineurs, et donc cela devrait être interdit par la loi. Pourtant, la présidente et le PDG de l'Association américaine de psychiatrie ont officiellement encouragé la direction de la FDA à rendre les ECT largement accessibles aux enfants et aux adolescents de tout âge. C'est une campagne qui vise ceux qui sont sans défense et avec une supervision gouvernementale presque inexistante.
One of the things that the marketing campaign does so brilliantly is to talk about electroshock as a treatment of last resort. That is what we call a lie. There are psychiatrists in the States who recommend electroshock for all sorts of things, including inscriptions like autism, ADHD, learning disability, and they recommend that that is the first treatment that people are given, not the last, not the end of the line.
Aujourd'hui, aux États-Unis, la réglementation fédérale exige que tous les fabricants de machines signalent les effets indésirables de l'ECT. Mais les fabricants de machines ne s'y conforment que rarement.
So you have manufacturers that know about adverse events, that have logs of adverse events, that didn't report adverse events to the FDA. And the FDA has done very little to actually enforce those regulations.
Et quand ils écrivent des rapports, ça leur prend parfois 17 ans. Et les effets mentionnés sont souvent horribles. Attaque cérébrale, catatonie, mort du fœtus, des brûlures à la tête, pour n'en nommer que quelques-uns.
My husband Jose Topete had ECT. They told us what a great thing it was and how it was going to help our family and help Jose. Jose had 23 treatments of ECT, and during the ECT treatments, he did not get better at any time. In fact, he had a breakdown at one time after the first week of ECT. We didn't realize that his whole memory was gone until after ECT was over. And one of the just terrible times was we live in a rural area that has a pond, and we have lots of frogs and bullfrogs. Well, we heard the frogs making a lot of racket, and Jose said, "What's that noise?" And we said, "Oh, it's just the frogs." And he said, "What's a frog?" He doesn't know his parents. He doesn't know his siblings. He has no memory of our marriage, the birth of his children, taking care of his family, his job. He was a California state tax auditor. He had no memory of what California tax law was. Everything was wiped out of his mind. His children, me, he didn't know who we were. At first I thought, okay, we'll be able to just teach him who we are and make him love us again. And that didn't work like that. It's been a real heartbreak for all of us.
Malgré tous les dommages causés, la machine à ECT n'a jamais été soumise à une régulation convenable.
What we have here is a basic electronic device. It generates pulses for the purpose of delivering an electric shock. There's nothing medical about it, it's just a pulse generator.
Cette machine à électrochoc a été achetée en ligne. Pas besoin de licence, pas de vérification des antécédents, on ne pose aucune question, juste besoin d'une carte de crédit.
In 1976, the United States Food and Drug Administration was given authority by Congress to regulate devices such as these. This device, of course, was never tested by the FDA because it's too old. This one was used starting in the 1940s. When the FDA gained control over these devices, they didn't start regulating ECT devices because they were already in use. Any device that was already being used did not need to be tested, as long as it's substantially equivalent to the devices that were used when the FDA took control.
The FDA allowed it to be grandfathered in, meaning it didn't require any proof of efficacy or clinical trials for safety and efficacy. They just let it stay on the market.
Donc maintenant, les psychiatres jouaient sur les deux tableaux. D'un côté, ils affirmaient que les machines à électrochocs étaient essentiellement équivalentes à celles des années 40, et en même temps, ils faisaient la promotion des électrochocs en les déclarant modernes, nouveaux et améliorés. Une supercherie évidente. Mais en 1979, la FDA a classé la machine à ECT comme un appareil de classe 3, c'est-à-dire à haut risque, et dont la sécurité devait être testée. La FDA a donné aux fabricants 3 ans pour essayer de prouver que les machines étaient sûres.
So, if ECT wants to claim safety and effectiveness, they should be showing by clinical studies that it's safe and effective. They haven't. And it isn't because they can't afford to. There's plenty of their own consultants that work for big league universities that get plenty of funding to do it. They choose not to because ECT is not effective.
Has Somatics ever conducted any studies to determine whether any brain injury could be caused by ECT?
Somatics has never conducted any studies of any kind. We're not in the business of doing studies of traumatic brain injury. We sell thymotrons.
Pour éviter tout risque de test, les psychiatres ont fait pression sur la FDA pour reclassifier leurs machines au niveau classe 2. Une catégorie qui inclut des produits comme les seringues, les lentilles de contact et les préservatifs.
There's nothing else in class 2 that causes brain damage, cardiac standstill, stroke, brain hemorrhage, seizures. It's really ridiculous for them to even be considered as class 2. The reason they want to put the ECT machine in class 2 is because it wouldn't have to be tested for safety or effectiveness.
À cause d'une indignation générale du public, la FDA a organisé une audience afin de déterminer la validité du reclassement. Des survivants de l'ECT se sont rendus à Washington pour témoigner.
I argued with a psychiatrist and he dumped me in the locked ward and shocked me 5 times. I became violent. I tore my nails off, dragged them under the door. And he said after 5 times, he said, sometimes they don't help you.
I had over 80 shock treatments. And yes, they called them maintenance treatments, but I don't remember my wedding day. I don't remember my husband putting a ring on my finger.
When I was given an IQ test a few months after the ECT and asked the population of the United States, I answered 1,000. When he asked me to guess again, I answered 2,000. I remember having no idea where to find the answer in my head.
Le comité consultatif était largement d'accord sur le fait que les machines à ECT devaient rester dans la classe 3 et être soumises à des tests de sûreté. Mais la FDA, représentée par Jeffrey Shuren et sa collègue Malvina Edelman, a ignoré les recommandations du comité et a élargi l'utilisation de la machine à ECT en tant qu'appareil classe 2.
3,000 submissions were sent into the Food and Drug Administration talking about the destructiveness of electroshock. The FDA and the APA and other psychiatrists want to make ECT more broadly available, despite the fact that all these people are saying no, despite tens of thousands of people saying the electroshock is damaging, that it can actually kill you, that it destroys their life.
I recently started ECT treatments, electroconvulsive therapy. I was supposed to have one today, but I went ahead and canceled it. Because I'm stupid now. Or I'm definitely not as smart as I used to be. Spent a lot of time and money on education because I wanted to be smart. And I was smart. I don't remember anything anymore. Right now, this is my life. if it's not on the sheet, I'm not remembering. When it came to ECT, it was out of sheer desperation. And I didn't research it. And I just trusted. And now that I'm where I am, I don't have the brain capacity to research it. It's too late.
Les psychiatres et les fabricants des machines à ECT sont bien conscients des dommages qu'ils créent. Donc pourquoi est-ce qu'ils continuent à le faire?
We look at the cost of manufacturing one of these machines. It has 3 of these transformers. They might be $40 a piece. And these parts probably could be collected for a total of about $50 or $60 for the components. The printed circuit board could probably be manufactured for less than $100 in quantity. All of these resistors are pennies a piece, and the integrated circuits are normally less than $1 a piece. So we see here a device that could be manufactured in quantity for between $500 and $1,000, including parts and labor.
Et avec des systèmes ECT qui se vendent jusqu'à près de $20 000, la marge de bénéfice est énorme. De plus, les psychiatres bénéficient énormément de la prescription d'ECT parce qu'ils doivent être présents et donc payés pour toutes les séances d'électrochocs.
It costs about $2,500 per session. So if you do the math, and let's just say for simple mathematics, the person has 10 sessions initially, that's $25,000.
Les hospitalisations sont encore plus lucratives, allant jusqu'à $120 000 par patient.
We would start usually around 6 a.m. We would see up to 13 patients a day. It was almost like an assembly line mentality, kind of get them in, get them worked up, get the treatment, and get them out, get the next one in, get the treatment, do the recovery, get them out. It was a very lucrative business. Big money maker.
Les psychiatres qui effectuent des électrochocs amassent en moyenne le double de ceux qui n'en administrent pas. Et ils peuvent obtenir ce revenu en ne travaillant que quelques heures par semaine.
It's been calculated that in America, psychiatrists doing a relatively small amount of electroshock, possibly 20 sessions a week, will earn anything up to an additional $300,000 per year.
Et avec 100 000 Américains recevant des ECT chaque année, les psychiatres ont créé un empire d'électrochocs estimé à 5,4 milliards de dollars rien qu'aux États-Unis. Plus d'argent que le budget national de plus de la moitié des pays du monde.
It has nothing to do with medicine. It has nothing to do with helping the patients. It's just a money machine.
Avec autant d'argent à se faire, l'industrie de l'ECT est en proie à de nombreux conflits d'intérêts. Le visage de ces conflits, le psychologue et fervent promoteur d'ECT, Harold Sackheim.
Has any manufacturer of ECT devices ever given you money?
I've received reimbursements in honoraria.
How much money have you received?
$10,000, maybe $15,000, $20,000, $20,000, $25,000, $70,000.
De plus, Sackheim a reçu au moins 9 millions de dollars de subventions gouvernementales pour la recherche sur l'ECT. Un profit personnel qui conduit à l'Institut national de la santé mentale des États-Unis, le NIMH, où son directeur de recherche sur l'ECT, le psychiatre Mathieu Rudorfer, supervise les subventions. Rudorfer a non seulement abreuvé l'Institut d'Harold Sackheim d'argent pendant des années, mais ils se sont aussi associés pour coécrire le chapitre d'un manuel sur l'ECT. Sarah Lisambi fait elle aussi partie du NIMH. elle a entretenu des liens financiers avec 10 fabricants d'appareils psychiatriques. Son mentor était Harold Sackheim. Puis il y a aussi Richard Weiner, de l'Association américaine de psychiatrie. Weiner était le principal psychiatre du groupe de travail de l'APA qui a préconisé de retirer les lésions cérébrales du formulaire de consentement de l'APA. En disant ceci, les lésions cérébrales n'ont pas besoin d'être considérées comme un risque potentiel. Weiner était également conseiller pour les 2 plus grands fabricants américains de machines à ECT, Mecta et Somatics. Somatics appartient à Richard Abrams et Conrad Schwartz, psychiatres qui facturent jusqu'à $20 000 pour un système à ECT. Richard Weiner, dans son rapport du groupe de travail sur l'APA sur l'ECT, citait plus de 60 articles de Richard Abrams. Et tous les acteurs clés dans cet enchevêtrement de corruption sont des membres du comité de rédaction de The Journal of ECT. Abrams, Schwartz, Lisanby, Weiner, Sackheim, Rudorfer, Kellner et Fink.
When you invite the foxes to watch the hen house and act like you're really guarding the place, well, it's really just a violation of public trust.
Et des gens voient leur vie détruite.
I had problems before I had shock treatments, and I would say I have more problems now.
I didn't receive any help from the ECT that the psychiatrist gave me. It destroys you.
Shock treatment felt like torture to me. I say it's like torture. It felt like it destroyed my spirit.
It beat all the abuse I even experienced. It beat the rapings, the molestations. It beat everything because it did so much to me psychologically and physically.
Prior to ECT, I never thought about suicide. After the second round of ECT, I definitely was considering it.
ECT stands for electroconvulsive torture. Because obviously, it didn't help my sister at all.
Psychiatry destroyed my father because it destroyed his purpose, and he committed suicide in the end.
Is it the responsibility of the psychiatrist performing ECT to make sure that no harm comes to his patient?
The answer to that is no.
Dans l'heure qui vient de s'écouler, les psychiatres ont administré plus d'1 millier d'électrochocs. Leurs victimes représentent 1 million de personnes dans le monde chaque année. Et avec les médecins administrant des électrochocs qui travaillent sans relâche pour éliminer les restrictions sur l'ECT, personne n'est en sécurité.
It's unconscionable, some of the things that I've seen, particularly as it pertains to very small children.
The way they've treated people is just unbelievable. I couldn't see treating my worst enemy that way.
Oh my God, I don't want that to happen to anybody. It brings tears to my eyes. It's frightening.
Just common sense will tell you that you don't need to put that electricity to their brain. I'm adamantly opposed.
Il n'y a qu'une solution à l'ECT. Un traitement qui est ni plus ni moins une électrocution.
It's a complete travesty as a civilized society to do these type of torturous, barbaric procedures.
ECT has to be stopped. We cannot continue to do this to people. We have safe and effective treatments that are out there. We do not need ECT.
It's just cruel and inhumane to be able to send people through that type of torture.
We're standing up and saying that this experimental dosing with ECT cannot occur anymore.
It's just assault and battery.
It's more torture than it is a medical treatment.
It should be illegal.
ECT should be banned.
ECT should have been banned 50 years ago. The sooner the better.
On peut y arriver. L'ECT a déjà été complètement ou en partie interdite dans plusieurs États et pays du monde.
We got rid of the lobotomy because it was such an abhorrent image and it was so obviously a form of torture and assault. Electroshock is equally a form of torture and assault. We just haven't gotten rid of it yet. And we need to take action and require the FDA to ban this device, which has never been proven safe or effective.
This is an atrocity that should never have gone as far as it has. It's just a mass experimentation. and the FDA does nothing. They need to be held accountable.
L'ECT doit être dénoncée pour ce qu'elle est, de la torture et une violation barbare des droits de l'homme. Notre avenir en dépend. Joignez-vous à la Commission des citoyens pour les droits de l'homme en dénonçant les électrochocs pour ce qu'ils sont, un crime contre l'humanité. Si vous ou qui que ce soit que vous connaissez avez souffert d'un traitement par électrochoc ou si vous voulez y faire quelque chose, passez à l'action et faites entendre votre voix. Contactez la CCDH.
Thank you.